Now, if we are not careful, if society is not careful, population growth can actually absorb any sort of technological progress or development or any increase in production. This is an old argument, first put forward by the economist Thomas Malthus about 200 years ago. Now, Thomas Malthus argued that when production increases, let's say we have a new technology for growing rice, and production of rice doubles. So now everyone has twice as much to eat, everyone's much happier, much healthier. They have more children. They have more children, population increases, eventually population doubles. And even though you're producing twice as much rice as before, now everyone's eating the same amount because population has caught up with technology. So his argument is in the very long run, over hundreds of years, societies will tend to fall back to what's called the subsistence level, just enough to be able to keep the people alive and have children to propagate the next generation. They will not become rich in general. Almost all the people will just be able to get by and have kids, and that's about it. Now, today, when people hear about Thomas Malthus, if they've heard of him at all, you think, oh, Thomas Malthus was wrong. Obviously, he was wrong. Our society is so much richer today than in the past. Ha ha ha, he was wrong. But even though Thomas Malthus is wrong about society of the last 200 years, he's actually describing very well what happened over the last thousands of years before the time when he was writing. So he was unfortunate enough to be correct about history up to his lifetime, but incorrect about the history after his lifetime. If you go back, 500, 1,000 years, 2,000 years ago, it's not that there was no technological progress. There was technological progress. In China, we went from growing millet, xiaomi, to growing rice. Why? Because rice is more productive. You can grow more rice than you can grow millet on the same amount of land. It went from growing rice dry to growing rice wet. Again, more productive. It developed irrigation system. So water wheels for irrigation, double cropping, so growing 2 crops a year instead of 1 crop of rice a year. New strains of rice. So a lot of technological progress in the last 2,000 years. Comparing the way agriculture was conducted in China during the Ming Dynasty versus the way agriculture was conducted during the Han Dynasty. There are differences, big differences. Rice, the land was more productive. And yet, most people lived subsistence living, very poor, hardly anything to eat, just enough to get by. Why? Because the population had increased. China's population had gone doubled again, 10 times more than before. And this population increase had absorbed all of this technological progress. And so people's GDP per capita had come back to the subsistence. So if we are not careful, there's always this tendency to fall back to the subsistence level. Now, in the last few hundred years, we've been lucky in a sense that technological progress has been faster than population growth. Population has been growing, but not by as fast as technological progress. Technological knowledge has been increasing. So GDP per capita has been rising because GDP has been growing faster than population. But this is not guaranteed. If population keeps on growing faster and faster, then we might fall back to subsistence level. On the other hand, an experience of the world is that for some reason that economists don't fully understand, rich countries have lower population growth rates than poor countries. It might be something to do with the education of women. like I was talking about earlier. It might have something to do with children being more expensive for rich families to raise, or the expectations of what's necessary to raise a child has changed. But all around the world, as a society becomes richer, their birth rates actually go down. This is actually very surprising. If you asked economists from the time of Thomas Malthus what they expected to happen as a society becomes richer, they would have said they would expect people to have more children. That was, their experience at the time. In the time, 200-300 years ago, rich families will have more surviving children than poor families. And yet, in today's world, rich families tend to have fewer children than poorer families. And so this might mean that this Malthusian problem is going to go away, because we might attain a new equilibrium with high income and low birth rates. This is a new, you can say, a new solution to the Malthusian threat. Not just We don't just depend on faster and faster technological progress compensating for population growth, but actually population growth slowing down, uh, so that we don't have to have this this problem anymore in the future. All right. So to sum up what we're talking about, we know that growth rates and growth experiences of countries have been different around the world. Why have they been different? Well, to some extent, it's being driven by your level of income today. Poor countries, if everything else is going okay, poor countries will tend to grow faster than rich countries because they can benefit from capital accumulation and capital accumulation driven growth. So there's a tendency for poorer countries to grow faster than richer countries. But this is if they do everything else right as well. Another thing driving differences, population growth rates. Lower population growth will mean that you have less stretching of your resources, more capital accumulation, more capital per worker, and so you have higher growth rates from lower population growth. And to some extent as well, in the shorter run, like 10, 20 years, changes in your labor force participation rate will explain differences in economic growth. So more people entering your workforce, increasing workforce participation rates mean your economic growth will tend to be faster. So as what has happened in China over the last 30 years, US as well, increasing labor force participation contributed towards faster economic growth. But when it goes in the other direction, so Japan over the last 20 years, aging population, and labor force participation rates for the whole population, percentage of workers in the population shrinking, then this will have a negative effect on economic growth. And savings and investment. Countries with high savings, high investment. China, for example, high savings, high investment, high infrastructure investment at a government. This contributes towards faster economic growth. And better schooling, better training for your workers, better capital accumulation. This also drives economic growth. And technological progress also drives economic growth. So in today's world, actually, with exchange of information around the world, being open to the rest of the world is actually very important. If you're open to the world, you can participate in the technological progress of the whole world. This will carry you forward with the world. Being closed, like North Korea, will actually retard your technological progress because you don't get the ideas and the technology from the rest of the world. So if you have a closed society, you don't allow trade or movement of people into and out of the society, this will retard your technological progress and will slow down growth. An example of this was India until about 1990. So after World War II and the British left India, India actually took a policy of self-sufficiency. They didn't allow foreign companies to come in and start factories, and they wanted to make their own thing. So there was this car they made in India. The original design of the car, they actually bought from a company in Europe. But they were making this car in India, and they made the same car for about 40 years. And when I mean the same car, I mean you could take a part out of a car manufactured in 1950 and move that part and put it in the car made in 1990, and it fit exactly. It was exactly, it didn't never change the design. That's because they did not participate of the whole technological progress of the whole world, because they did not allow this movement of ideas and knowledge into the society that comes from foreign investment and foreign trade. They're trying to develop their local, but their market was just not large enough. Being part of the world market is much more important. And as we talked about governments, having a stable political environment with rule of law and respect for property rights and low corruption and no political violence, especially chaos and civil war is bad. Having a stable political environment and rule of law is also very important for political growth, for economic growth. So this is pretty much how economists explain differences in the growth experience of countries around the world. So let's look now at some of the growth experience of countries around the world and see, if these ideas work. So these are countries arranged by growth rates, limited, some countries, example countries, and investment rates over here. And you can see that the higher the investment, tendency higher investment, higher growth. But it's not a perfect fit. There are other things going on as well. So the fastest growth country is between 1960 and 1990 was South Korea and Singapore. They had high investment rates, but not the highest. Highest is actually Japan. West Germany had very high investment rates as well, but slower GDP growth. What's going on there? Well, what's going on there is that South Korea was very poor in 1960. Singapore as well is not very rich in 1960. They were benefiting from capital accumulation growth between 1960 and 1990. So it's because they were poorer than Japan and West Germany. They could grow faster than Japan and West Germany with the same investment rates. So the fastest growing countries are those that are poorer than the developed countries. So the fastest growing countries are those that are poorer than developed countries. And developed countries, by and large, did not experience this very high growth rate. So West Germany, Canada, UK, US had slower growth rates than South Korea, Singapore, Japan, which were poorer than these countries. So another thing we can see is that India here had a pretty decent investment rate. I mean, not the highest, but okay. They were also poor. Why didn't they grow fast? They tended to grow very slowly. Like I mentioned, from the end of World War II, actually from independence until 1990 or so, they had a closed economy. They didn't allow foreign companies to come in to invest. They try to restrict growth, try to restrict trade. They had high tariff barriers. And this ended up not working well for them. They had not very high growth rate. Now, if you hear about India today, you know that their growth rates are very quite high today, higher than China's today, actually, because China slowed down. So what changed? What changed is that in 1990, by some accident, an economist became prime minister. This economist, his name was Manmohan Singh. When he came into power, he got rid of tariff barriers and allowed foreign investment. And India went from growing at 1.5% per year to growing at 7-8% per year. So this is a very good, what we call natural experiment, showing us the change in the experience and policy exchange. So being open to the whole world really enables faster growth. So this is the Indian experience before 1990. Let's see now, what else do we see here? So there's Chile. You can see Chile had pretty high investment, but had pretty low growth rates. Chile is a middle income country. They were not as poor as South Korea, and they are not as rich as the US. Their investment rates were about as high as the US, but they had slower growth than the US. Chile did not do well in this period. Why didn't they do well? Well, you might have heard about this. If you haven't, in South America of that time, around 1970s, 80s, there's a lot of political strife between the left-wing socialists and the right-wing capitalist groups, and there's a lot of fighting. And in a lot of these countries, military governments took over, supporting the conservative right wing. They took over, and they imposed despotic rule, military rule, and they oppressed anyone who they thought opposed them. So there was this issue called the disappeared. So it's like university professors like myself, maybe I'm in Chile and talking in class, and I say something like, "Oh, it's good for the government to support the people and have inclusive regulations and not be corrupt." And next thing you know, next week when you come to class, I'm not there, and no one knows where I am. The department phones on my family and says, where's the professor? I don't know. He went out one night and he's gone. We don't know where he is. We're trying to find out where. And this happened a lot. Professors, union leaders, laborers, politicians, even student organization leaders. They were disappeared. What had happened to them? They had been killed by the government. So there's political violence in that time. And this really impacted the society. And it also impacted economic growth. You can see it here. Same in Rwanda. You've heard of the political unrest in that country. So politics, stable governments have a lot to do with economic growth as well. Good governments, not just stable, but good governments that protect the people have a lot to do with economic growth. So that's the story we tell them of economic growth around the world. To some extent, poor countries can grow fast. And if poor countries don't grow, it's not that they don't have the opportunity to grow, but something's holding them back. So to some extent, it's these failures of growth that is a story of economic growth and lack of economic growth around the world. Okay, so what should governments do to promote economic growth in less developed countries, poorer countries? Uh, Mentioning already stable governments, but also investing in the schooling system, increasing human capital accumulation and physical capital accumulation, building up infrastructure, encouraging savings and investment by private companies, importing technologies, being open to the world so that the technology flows into the country, and also limiting population growth. You can do that by encouraging girls to get more education. This will slow down the population growth rate. And also, very important is good governance. So reducing corruption, some extent also having transparent, clear regulations in place that encourages everyone to participate in a society and start businesses, and having a stable government with clear rules. This all encourages economic development. Okay, now I'd like you to consider these questions and think about what effect they might have on economic growth, given what we've talked about.